Today, I'm outside of my normal home lab and room environment, taking a look at Proxmox on the go with the semi-recently announced at this point, Proxmox mobile app for phones, which also works on the iPad and Mac I'll take a look at in a little bit. I'm coming at this from the perspective of I believe the desktop web UI as well as the command line is the way to go if you want advanced management and really want to dive into Proxmox and everything you can do with it. But having a mobile app so I can kind of see what's going on possibly with my server and see if it's a quick fix or if it's an actual VM issue or what's going on to kind of how should I start troubleshooting has been a useful idea and feature for me at times. And there's a lot of times where I might not want to carry a laptop, but having the ability to do some troubleshooting seems like a nice ability to have. So that's the perspective I'm taking a look at the app from, and gonna leave the room to see what it looks like when I'm on the go and not sitting in front of a normal computer, because that's not when I think the app makes sense. Also, for note, I'm going to be using an iPhone and iPad later on for all of these parts of this video, and I'm also going to be using the latest iOS 27 dev beta for the purpose of this video as well. So if there's issues that arise as part of that, just wanted everyone to know what versions I'm using. So let's start off with the app right now. I've already added my main primary home server, but I can go under Add and I can add the IP. One thing that the app shows when setting up a new install is that, do you want me to bug you about bad SSL certificates? Because they probably know a lot of people like me set up temp servers and don't bother doing all the SSL certificates correctly. So the fact that they bug you that having an easy switch is really nice to have. So I'm going to use a password I have here. Now, one thing I do want to know is it looks like iOS is trying to auto-save passwords, which are different on different servers. So I'm going to actually blur out what that one is, but it's going to let me fairly quickly log in and use it. And I will note I have disabled it there. So once I immediately log in on the phone interface, I get the most basic statistics on my system right now, including CPU info, memory usage, just the nodes, and if it was in a cluster, I don't have a cluster to look at right now, virtual machines that are on and off, and containers that are on and off. Resources gives me a closer look at all of my VMs and containers, as well as the storage on the bottom. Pretty much if you're on the desktop web interface, the stuff that's on the left under each of your different nodes. And access lets me adjust a few things like user permissions, API tokens, groups, roles, and domains. Sites puts me back at the top little menu that allows me to see my active sessions, as well as seeing other sessions I want. So one thing they've also added the ability to do is to use Face ID on iPhones so that if you have it on your phone, you can keep someone who wants to possibly just log in to not have it, which is a nice feature if you possibly share that phone with other people who might not have your Face ID. Now let's dive into one of the VMs and see what the options I have for that VM are. So in this example, I have a Veeam2 VM as I call on here. I can see that it's online and running, the VM number, what node it's running on, CPU usage, and CPU usage over a period of time. Memory usage, if I swipe over, I can tap down and see all the tasks the system's run. So it looks like QM starts ran a couple of times, and each time with a warning. So if I want to look at the full log, it takes a sec, but it looks like something about UEFI warnings, possibly a video on that in the future. I can see power settings, so I can do shutdown, hibernate, start, reset, and more, all the common power-related settings. I can do a no VNC console. If I want to do a Spice console, they recommend using a separate, although paid app to configure that. And I can see this is a Windows box that I will dive more into the UI and actually interacting with the console in a little bit. I can see options for the VM. So this is under the same options tab if I was in the web interface, with some of this being adjustable in here. So things like start on boot, hardware virtualization, and more. Unfortunately, a few of the more advanced settings seem to have no way to adjust, so things like boot order, name, and a little bit more. And then if I exit here, I can have it do a backup to one of my different storages on this system. So I can tell it to back up to local shuck right now, and I can just say start the backup, and it looks like it's going to start giving me the logs and how much data has been done through here. So I'm going to get rid of that backup, and here we go. And under hardware, it allows me to view all of the hardware that's on this system, but nothing can really be changed. Taking a quick look at a container, the overall interface is very similar with this container and just has a slightly different options because containers work a bit differently under the hood. And Same with options. They're different because containers need different options, but similar, you get the access to change some of them, like start on boot, but not everything. The big thing I want to note with this interface is there's no obvious way to do things like create containers, change boot orders, install OSs, and more. So for me, some uses that I think I would want to use this in like a home lab or kind of a smaller business situation is I get an email on my phone or something seems awry with the server. And maybe I can't access it or I don't immediately know what the problem is. Is the VM server down? Is the VM having issues? Is all the hardware dead? I'm not sure. So the way I see this app is this is possibly a quick way to dive into it and say, hey, and I'm going to take a look at my node. I'm going to immediately look at CPU and memory and tell, hey, is that usage excessive? Does that look like that's possibly an issue? I might take a look at my resources and say, hey, are the VMs running that should be running and not running that shouldn't be running? That's pretty quick and painless, fairly easy to scroll through, unless I have a ton of them, but then I can filter by like tags, for example, and make that fairly easy. If I want to, I can filter by the types of systems, but if I have a lot of VMs, that could be a little annoying. And I can look at storage space to say, did I have an oopsie and accidentally fill up all the storage space there? Looking at a specific VM, I can start the VM if something was to go wrong. And for kind of my most common, let's take a look at logging into a console and see how much I can do on a phone. Overall, I'm not a big fan of using phones as a way of adminning things remotely, just because it's a small screen with a touchscreen. So if I'm trying to remote into things, I can't often see it well, or the screen's too small to be useful. And a lot of the times, especially if I'm in the command line, typing all those weird symbols just isn't great. But for example, with this VM, if it wasn't running, I can see that it started up now, seems to be responding okay. Now, one of my concerns is by default, it acts as a touchscreen, which can be fine, but with the slightly laggy way that oftentimes no VNC plus a virtualized graphics card works, it's not great, but it is enough for me to, for example, tap the start menu, tap settings, and maybe change one quick network setting. Do you like using remote desktop on your phones? Let me know in the comments below. I'm curious if you have any tricks to make this work well, because if I'm spending more than a minute doing remote desktop, I'm probably going to try to pull out that laptop if I possibly can. The way I see myself using an app like this in my personal home lab or small business is the type of situation where I get bugged about some sort of issue or I notice something isn't working. I might be on the go or I don't have a laptop in front of me. And I think overall, this app does a pretty good job for me of log into the dashboard, take a look at CPU and memory utilization, and see, does anything seem awry? I can go under resources, scroll through seeing, are my VMs and containers that should be running actually running? Take a look at storage utilization, see if it's too high. If my issue's with a single VM instead of everything, I can tap on that VM, check out its usage, open the console, and see if there's anything immediately on screen that runs an issue, like if there's a blue screen on there, or if it's unresponsive. And I can do one of the most common fixes, which might be just the reset of the VM and hope it starts working on next reboot. Or if it's something where like an app didn't start, I can kind of get a quick sense of why. For the, in my opinion, relatively little effort it takes to get the app set up, and the fact that it's a free app that's on a phone that most people likely already own, I think it's a pretty low cost for what is a bit of a convenience at times. Having the ability to do a little bit more configuration in the app than they currently have, like the ability to change CD-ROM drives, for example, changing the boot order, I could see myself to maybe try to get into a rescue CD on the go, and a little bit more might be nice. Especially seeing that the fact that it also runs relatively well on an iPad, which is something that semi-frequently might have a keyboard attached where I could actually be using it a good amount. I do want to note on the iPad, I have a fresh install just to show how it's like, and I can see that it goes into settings, say don't validate it, and they also tell you about if you're using Spice, you have to download a third-party paid Spice client, but most of the time I'm using no VNC, which works fine in the app for free, and I don't have to leave the app. So under settings, I can see that validate SSL connections, which is really easy to access, and I can go add my account on the iPad. Taking a look at the iPad app, it does really look like the iPhone app, but better. It doesn't look like they've gone out of their way to optimize it for iPads, because I think at least on my 11-inch iPad, they could have done side-by-side and shown resources next to dashboard or something like that, which would have been a better use of space. The biggest question I have for the iPad is how well does it actually let me use the console, and is it a better experience on the bigger screen? So let's take a look at the console view, and continue. If I had to make one little pet peeve with the software of things I'd like improved, being able to hide that little top bar somehow, especially on small phone screens in the horizontal mode, makes it a lot smaller than it possibly could be. And on phones, I really want to get the most I can out of any chunk of screen space there is. So I'm just remote desktoped into a Windows 11 VM on my system here. It's a relatively slow storage it's running on, but overall, Windows UI runs pretty well, and because Windows is optimized for touchscreens, it thinks this is a tablet pointer to Windows. It's a little bit better of an experience, so I have an iPad with me. I'll probably use it for the Proxmox app instead of my phone, but it's a lot of the same limitations having to use a software keyboard and stuff, so I'd probably take my laptop if I thought I had to do Proxmox administration on the go. But speaking about laptops, one of the things with these new M series Macs is I can run iPad apps on them like another Mac app. So here is my Mac running Proxmox, the app on it. So taking a look at the app, I see pretty much the same UI I'd expect on my iPad or iPhone, just blown up a little bit to fit on here. So I can see everything I want on here like the normal app, and it works. So for example, if I go under virtual machines, I can see running ones. I can go to one of mine, we'll open the console. So one of the nice things is things like the keyboard just works in the Mac app, and I don't have to think about anything. The mouse cursor and no VNC works fine, but because it opens in essentially the main window instead of using separate tabs, I think it's going to be slower for me to admin, because if I want to go and look at other VMs, I can't just open a different tab. I now have to go back. And for me, at least, I don't see any reason why I'd use that over just using the standard web interface like I'm used to, which still works just fine on a Mac and gives me much more information when it comes to graphs on here, seeing a full log, and more things in my view at once. So overall, I've played with it on 3 different devices. Having an app so I can take a look at my VMs in my pocket without having to bring anything I normally wouldn't bring with me, and do some troubleshooting and get a better sense of how I'm going to have to figure out the problem, or do I need hardware access because the whole node's down, or is just a VM down, or do I need a new drive or something like that, is nice to have. And it gives you just a little bit more troubleshooting ability and control that something like just email notifications would give me. But on the other hand, if I'm going on a trip where being able to do some sort of configuration or control or something like that is a nice ability to have, and I have some bag space, I'm going to bring my laptop. It's a nice thing to have, and for me is a much easier way to admin my nodes. Let me know, is that the kind of conclusion you have? Are you going to download and set it up on your phone so you have it just in case you need it? Do you have other thoughts about the Proxmox app? Let me know in the comments below. I'm interested to see what everyone else's thoughts on this app are. And thanks for watching.